The story begins on April 10, 1912. RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship of its time, embarks on its maiden voyage. Departing from Southampton, England, it was headed toward New York City, carrying all kinds of passengers, industrialists, actors. There was huge excitement among the public and the media about this new ship. And electric baths, a gym, a squash court, for restaurants, to barbershops, and even a library. And because of its advanced safety features, it was called Unsinkable. The company that built the Titanic White Star Line was so confident that its vice president publicly declared, "This ship is unsinkable." After all, not only was it the biggest in the world to 269 meters long and over 50 meters high, but also the most luxurious ship ever built. Within a minute, the Titanic scraped along the side of the iceberg. This was no small chunk of ice. The iceberg was 200 by 400 feet, as large as a football field, and tall enough to reach the crow's nest. Estimated weight, over 1.5 million tons. The ship would still float. But the iceberg tore through 6 compartments. Not just for radio operator, Jack Phillips became a hero that night, sending SOS after SOS, hoping someone nearby would respond. And the double hull was at the bottom. The damage was on the side. In short, Titanic was doomed. The problem? It was 107 kilometers away. Even at full speed, it would take 3.5 hours to reach Titanic. Meanwhile, Titanic's crew fired flares and rockets into the sky, but no other ship responded. At 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat was launched. Yet over 1,500 people remained on the ship. The water temperature, -2 degrees Celsius, anyone who jumped in either drowned or died within minutes from hypothermia. Realization set in, the Titanic was going to sink. Panic exploded. Chaos took over. By 1 a.m., the bow was underwater. The stern lifted out of the sea. Others believe he took his own life. The Carpathia arrived around 4:30 a.m. It rescued 705 survivors. But the rest, the frozen bodies, floated silently in the sea. The ship's massive propellers were now visible in the air. Another ship, SS Californian, was only 37 kilometers away. No safety drill. The day Titanic hit the iceberg, a drill had been scheduled. Captain Smith canceled it. Steering error. The helmsman panicked and turned the ship the wrong way, toward the iceberg. They found the remains 3.8 kilometers underwater, in 2 pieces, 600 meters apart. Ignored warnings. Over 7 iceberg alerts were received that day and ignored. Yet over 110 years later, Titanic still captivates our imagination. By the time they turned their radio back on, it was too late. All they found were dead bodies. It was supposed to launch in 2016, but delays pushed it to 2022, and then nothing. Many say Titanic 2 may have sunk before it even set sail. It had seen the ice and stopped for the night, and turned off its radio at 11:15 p.m. He wanted Titanic to reach New York in just 6 days to break a record, to prove Titanic was the fastest, not just the biggest or most luxurious. When Captain Smith showed him the iceberg warning, Ismay pocketed it, keeping it hidden from the crew. At that time, Titanic cost about $7.5 million to build, which is equivalent to $400 million today. So the first lifeboat, with space for 65 people, left with only 28 on board. Tiny holes and dents were formed. But how could ice cut through metal? Well, think about it. A car hitting a tree. The car crumples, even though the tree is just wood. Now, imagine a ship hitting a 1.5 million ton iceberg at high speed. The damage was devastating, and immigrants all chasing the dream of a better life in America. The ship was commanded by 62-year-old Captain Edward John Smith, one of the most senior captains of the White Star Line. The ship's interior facilities rivaled 5-star hotels, stained glass windows, ornate wood paneling, 2 massive grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, Turkish. But just 2 days into the voyage, on April 12th, the Titanic began receiving its first iceberg warnings. The Atlantic Ocean it was sailing through was filled with icebergs and floating ice mountains. Dangerous for ships. That night was especially dangerous because there was no moonlight. It was pitch dark and visibility was extremely poor. It wasn't unusual for ships to warn each other via radio about ice in the area. The Titanic even changed its course twice to avoid danger, but never reduced its speed. It continued full steam ahead to 21.5 knots, or about 40 kilometers per hour. 2 days later, on April 14th, more warnings were issued, but Captain Smith and his crew ignored them. They still didn't slow down. A lookout named Frederick Fleet was stationed in the crow's nest, a small platform high above the ship to spot obstacles. The icy wind was strong, causing his eyes to tear up. Then, at 11:40 p.m., he suddenly saw a massive iceberg directly ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times and called the bridge, yelling, "Iceberg, right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch received the call and ordered the ship to turn, but it was too late. The collision occurred on the front right side of the ship and tore a long gash in the hull. Captain Smith and Titanic's designer Thomas Andrews rushed to inspect. What they found shocked them. The ship was going to sink. They had believed the ship was unsinkable, thanks to 2 main safety features: a double-bottom hull, a second protective layer beneath the ship, and 16 watertight compartments, even if 4 filled with water. Around 12 a.m., Captain Smith gave the order to send a distress signal. At 12:20 a.m., a nearby ship, RMS Carpathia, received the signal. The evacuation began. Women and children first, the protocol. But many passengers still didn't panic. They believed the ship couldn't sink. But as time passed, the ship began to tilt. People began fighting for lifeboats, but there were only 20 lifeboats, enough for 1,200 people, and there were over 2,200 passengers on board. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic broke in two and sank. It took less than 3 hours for the unsinkable ship to disappear into the ocean. Captain Smith was last seen on the bridge. Some say he went down with his ship. And now comes the most shocking twist. They even saw Titanic's flares, but the captain assumed it was just rich people partying. Both the American and British inquiries blamed Californian's captain, Stanley Lord. But he wasn't the only one at fault. There were many mistakes. Too few lifeboats. The builders believed they didn't need more for an unsinkable ship. In 1914, the International Ice Patrol was created. New laws demanded lifeboats for all passengers. Safety drills became mandatory. But why didn't they slow down? One popular theory says White Star Line's managing director, Joseph Bruce Ismay, pressured Captain Smith. This one disaster changed maritime law forever. The Titanic wreck wasn't discovered until 1985 by Robert Ballard and a French team. Today, much of the ship is eroding, and by 2030, scientists believe it may vanish completely. In 2012, an Australian billionaire, Clive Palmer, announced plans for Titanic II, an exact replica of the original ship.